As you can see from the title of today's video, I'm going to be talking about how I played a perfect chess game with no opening preparation. Now, the way that I like to do my openings is I do like to memorize some certain lines in some certain openings, but particularly with the black pieces and particularly against these d4 sort of setups from white, particularly these Catalan-esque setups, I don't see a point in memorizing all of the moves and the different systems that you can play because I essentially like to keep my opening repertoire, particularly with the black pieces, very solid and very easy to play. So obviously this is like a Slav/Karo Khan-esque setup, and I essentially play that against pretty much anything that white plays, and I'm going to be showing you today how you can play like a really, really high-level chess game. Like the chess.com game review rated it at like a 2400 level or something, like 97% accuracy. Without memorizing your openings, it's not necessary. This is round 5 of the Buca 2025 Chess Championship. Now, Buca is like the UK university big rapid chess championship held over a full weekend. And so far, we have, I believe, one win, 2 draws, and 1 loss so far in the league. And we're playing against literally some of the best chess players in the UK, like some of the best young chess players in the UK. Lots of FMs, CMs, even an IM was playing. So make sure you check out the previous episodes linked down in the playlist below. Today we are against Loughborough, and I'm playing for Birmingham. We came in as the bottom seed of this tournament, meaning we had the lowest average rating. 1745 is obviously not my rating. My opponent is also not rated 1600. My opponent is like a 2000. I'm also like a 2000. I think this might be the only game in this tournament where I was rated like the same as my opponent. I've had quite a few comments asking why the ratings are wrong, so let me just explain quickly for any of you wondering. So these ratings are FIDE rapid ratings, right? Because it's a FIDE rapid tournament. However, I live in England, and in England, we don't have many FIDE tournaments in general. Most tournaments are ECF rated, ECF standing for English Chess Federation. So we have a completely separate rating system. It's equivalent to FIDE. It is absolutely equivalent, but it's a separate organization. I don't know why. It just is. If anyone knows, please let me know down in the comments. So, this tournament doesn't take our ECF ratings, it takes our FIDE ratings. However, like I said, there's not many FIDE tournaments. If there are FIDE tournaments, they're also normally classical tournaments, right? Meaning that this is our FIDE rapid ratings, so it's not going to take our rapid ratings into account. The only tournament I've ever seen in England which is FIDE rapid rated is this tournament, which I played last year. Didn't do that well last year because, you know, if you've been seeing the previous episodes of this playlist, you'll know that I'm playing against like 22, 23, 2400 rated players, right? So I didn't perform very well. I got a bad rating, 1745, from that tournament. And also, because FIDE Rapid rating, like FIDE Rapid tournaments are so rare in the UK, it's kind of like a bit of a rating bubble where people are massively underrated. Like, I'm massively underrated here. My opponent's massively underrated. Okay? Cool. All that out the way. Make sure you stick around to games 2 and 3 from my teammates because they played a couple of really cool games. Let's get into it. Knight f6. I am playing this like a Karo Khan. Bishop g2, bishop f5. My whole plan is do not let white play e4. If white plays c4, that's okay, which he does. I'm going to go e6. White can never really take me. I will take back with my e-pawn, play something like bishop d6, castles, knight bd7, and I have a very, very comfortable position. My entire plan is that I'm not going to let this bishop open up. This bishop cannot open up. That's the way that I like to play these Catalan-esque positions. Of course, my opponent isn't going to take. He's going to try and play e4 and force this diagonal open. That's what he wants to do, and I'm going to try and not let him do that. So my opponent, of course, does not take. That would be very silly. He castles. I go bishop d6, slightly inaccurate, but again, it looks kind of like a London from the black side, but it's also, I'm playing it in a Karo Khan manner, essentially. Just trying to control the light squares in the center. I, of course, have my bishop outside of the pawn chain before I play e6, and it's just a comfortable position. White will try to push, and I will try to liquidate the center as quickly as I can. If white plays a move like c5, that's not really very concerning. I can drop my bishop back to c7 or e7. Let's say c7 to stop bishop to f4. Now, I did think in some lines my opponent could play bishop to f4 anyway, not in this particular line, but in some of them coming up, and essentially allow this pawn structure and whack the knight on the e5 square. But not just yet, though. Although this apparently has been played online a fair bit, with very good success for the white pieces. Knight c3, putting pressure on my center. I castle. I mean, of course, I'm never going to take here. Like I said, I'm trying to keep this diagonal closed, and you can see from the evaluation, this gives the advantage to white, who has like a 70% win rate from this position, which is nuts. So, I castle. Queen b3, attacking the b7 pawn. Here, black has three options. Either black goes queen b6, black goes queen d7, or black goes queen c8, because you need to defend the b7 pawn. You can't really go queen c7. I think c5 is probably an issue. Something like this looks very, very uncomfortable, and you will have to drop your queen back to maintain control anyway. And although the computer says it's okay, this is clearly not a comfortable position for the black pieces. So queen c7 is, not really a move. Which one of these would you play? Have a think about it, because this is important in improving your chess. Now, there's not necessarily a correct answer here. I spent a while in this position. As you can see from the clocks down here, we're playing on live boards, so you can see the time that we spent. Queen b6 I considered heavily, but the reason I didn't want to go for this line is because c5, a very thematic move, forcing me to take on b3, a b3, and I was thinking, I can go bishop e7, and after a move like b4, white essentially wants to try and put pressure on the open file. A move like a6, which is very typical. Something like, bishop e3 is apparently a move, but b5 looks way more natural. Like cb5, knight b5, you can't take because of the pin. So let's say knight c6. Knight comes back to c3. This bishop's coming to this diagonal. And I thought this looked very uncomfortable with this knight potentially jumping into the b3 square. So I rejected queen b3 on that note. I also didn't like bishop c7 because I thought that bishop to f4 could be played in this position. And white has like a 61% win rate here. And I was telling my opponent about this after the game, and he said he hadn't actually considered that, but that made a lot of sense. And I thought that, this knight comes in here, b4, b5 will get played at some point. The knight can potentially hop in if I play a6. And I thought it was a really uncomfortable position. I couldn't see how I generate any counterplay because I can never play the move e5 because this square is controlled so nicely. The computer here wants knight to e8, and after a move like e3, knight c7, let's say b4, it wants knight b to a6, and if a move like rook a4, then b5. Which makes sense when you see it, but even if you get this trade, this pawn optically looks weak, although these pawns are obviously also weak. I, of course, did not see that far, and nor did my opponent, and I declined the move queen b6 on that basis. I didn't go queen to d7 because I thought that just takes away my knight's developing square, so I chose queen to c8, and I spent a couple minutes on that move. I was pretty happy with the move, though. My opponent went bishop to g5, and I thought this was a bad decision. Because I just play knight to e4. And why is your bishop on g5? It is just a target. It's literally just a target. So the bishop drops back to e3, it looks really silly, but it's actually quite typical in the Catalan. I go knight bd7. Sorry, not knight bd7, just knight to d7. Playing c5 never really helps white, by the way. I can just drop my bishop back, probably go bishop f6, and if I can execute e5 at the correct moment, maybe I have to throw in a move like rook e8, then black is the one pushing. So rook ac1, white would like to trade on his terms. I play the move h6, not the most accurate, but I essentially was considering moves like rook e8, but I didn't want to allow knight to h4 because my bishop is a bit stuck. I can't play this because, I just lose a pawn. I mean, maybe. Oh no, I'm hanging my bishop. What am I on about? So I can't allow knight to h4. That was what my thought process was. So instead, I played the move h6. Knight h4, of course, can be met with a move like knight c3. You can't take here, I don't think, because I take on e2 and then the king moves, and then I can take on c1 with an attack on the queen. So something like this, and black is up like a rook. So the tactics work out in my favor. So my opponent takes on d5. I can't take back. I didn't think I could take back because I thought my opponent had knight to d5 playing on the pin. However, black actually has the move bishop to e6, which I completely missed. However, I took on c3 because I didn't want to allow any shenanigans. My opponent takes back with the b pawn. Taking back with the rook would be a big inaccuracy because I take on d5 and it's not clear how white is playing here. I'm going to put my knight on e4. I'm probably not going to play c5 because that weakens d5. I'll put my rook on e8. Maybe the knight even comes to g4. And it's only black pushing here. This bishop is completely dead. As long as e4 doesn't happen, the bishop is completely dead, which is the soul of white's position. So b takes is necessary. Because after I take back on d5, of course I'm not going to take with the c pawn and allow c4 to be lined up with my queen. I will take with the e pawn and basically try to keep this diagonal shut. But now white can of course go c4 and insist on opening up the diagonal to the best of his ability. What would you play here with the black pieces? Have a think. Have a think. So the whole game I've been not wanting to take on c4, right? And my thought process was, well, it opens up this diagonal. I don't want to do that. This is different. Here I have to take, because if I don't take, the second best move is bishop e6. And if white takes, of course I take, and that's absolutely fine, right? Because this bishop is challenged. But white can play a move like c5 for starters, and I mean, I don't know if my opponent would have actually gone for this, but maybe he can try and play on the queen side and like go for a minority attack kind of idea. Which, by the way, you will see in round 9 of this tournament. I know that's a long way off, but you will see that. By the way, if you're enjoying the video so far, please smash the like and subscribe button if you haven't already. Really helps to motivate me keep making these videos for you guys. So basically, yeah, a move like bishop to e6. Yes, c5 can be played, but white can also just leave the tension. What else does the computer like? Knight e5? If I take, then c takes. If bishop takes, then you can use the pin. That makes sense. So I take on c4 though, and after queen takes, find the move for black. You're essentially choosing between these two moves, right? I think we can all see that. Or bishop e4 actually, trying to rotate to d5. I choose knight b6, with the idea being that the queen actually doesn't have many squares. If you go to c3, then I can apparently go queen to e6, target a2, get on the e-file. My knight might come to d5 and cause you some issues. So let's say, I don't know, you defend the pawn by pushing it, knight d5, and black is clearly better. Queen moves, knight takes, queen takes, f takes. Oh, bishop a3 at the end of the line anyway. So maybe, well, a4, you actually still can't defend that. The a pawn is actually quite weak in these lines because my bishops are so strong. So my opponent chooses the best square. He goes queen to b3. And yes, I can play bishop to e6. The queen goes to b1. I mean, if I went back here, then of course my opponent would probably just repeat. So instead, I go bishop to d5, getting on this very good diagonal, which is the way that I justify trading off my d-pawn, right? And now my opponent moves his knight. I go queen to e6. Of course, I could take the bishop, but I thought that it was a little bit more accurate to play queen to e6 because I'm threatening the a2 pawn. I'm also threatening to win a pawn by taking the knight. My opponent takes, I take back. The a pawn is now defended. And my opponent goes rook f2 d1 after a minute or so of thinking. And I thought this was a very good idea from my opponent. I spent not that long in this position. I assumed it was probably pretty drawish. I mean, both of us have been playing very, very accurately. But I've got the black pieces. I'm fine with that. I trust that my teammates can get some results on the other boards. So I take on e5. Pawn takes, queen takes. And as you can see, I'm up a pawn, but the computer values this at an equal position. My opponent takes, a takes, queen takes. And what I had calculated was queen takes, rook a2, rook here, and rook c2. And I thought that it's an uncomfortable position for white. I have an extra pawn. If I push it, for now, the computer says it's minus 0.3, right? But let's say white plays some nothing moves. Like, the closer the pawn gets, the more dangerous the position becomes, and the more likely it is that my opponent messes something up. But I missed rook e1, which I thought was a really smart move. I played queen a6, offering a queen trade. I thought my opponent was going to go queen c7, and my plan was rook ac8. If the queen goes to d7, I was going to go rook to d8. If the queen goes back, then I was going to infiltrate with the rook, probably to the second rank, and I thought I can maybe push here. I mean, there's a lot of options that can happen, but my opponent instead takes. And I thought that obviously only black can win this endgame, right? Being up a pawn. But it's actually really difficult. My opponent goes rook to e7. White has to be active here. If white is passive, then black can win. Like, rook e7 is the only move that doesn't lose. h4 is the second best move, but like rook a2, if now you try to infiltrate, then rook b2, I'm just up 2 clean pawns. So white needs to counterattack. Rook e7. I go rook to b6, defending the pawn. The rook goes to d1, trying to come into d7. And here I infiltrated on b2, attacking the a2 pawn. The rook comes to c7, a very smart move. I was assume my opponent was going to play this, which is completely fine. I was going to go b6, and if rook here, c5, trying to maintain my 2 pawns and making sure this pawn is still always weak. This position is completely drawn, because I can never move my rook, because rook f7, and I'm actually the one losing. And even if, in some of these lines, I was calculating after this, here, it doesn't work, because this rook always takes on f7, and it defends the f2 pawn, so I don't have good enough counterplay. And if anything, white is better here, because this pawn is also going to fall most likely, and my king is completely isolated. So I play b5, giving up the c6 pawn to take on a2. My opponent goes rook to d2, rook d7. And in this position, I thought for a while. I think I fought for about 4 minutes trying to make this work. And I offered my opponent a draw, and he accepted, because there is no way for me to make progress here. If I try to push the pawn, rook b7, I was calculating various things here, but just nothing works. If I defend my pawn, then at the very least, the other rook comes to the b file, and I don't have a way to save the pawn. If I try to be proactive in this position and play a move like this to defend the pawn, then rook cc7, attacking the f-pawn. This rook can't defend the pawn. I did think that maybe, just maybe, if this rook was able to get to the f-file and defend, then maybe I can push. Maybe. But to be honest, my opponent can probably just do this. And this is probably a draw, although this is more winnable for the black pieces, I think. But my opponent plays very well. Again, I agreed. I offered him a draw in this position, and he accepted. And it's obviously this game is drawn. A very, very accurate game. Very well played from both sides. And now, let's move on to our board 1 game. So, if you haven't seen the previous episodes of this playlist, firstly, go watch them. If you're going to be stubborn and not go watch them, then I will just explain that this is a 4 versus 4 format. And our board 1, Luke Honey, is against Oliver Howell, who I think I played last year, actually. I might have done. And he goes e6 with the French defense. And Luke was telling me after the game that he'd prepared this very tricky line. After knight c3, bishop 2, b4, the winner variation, you then take on d5. And I was asking him, well, isn't the knight misplaced on c3? And he was saying yes. However, the bishop is also misplaced on b4. Because normally in an exchange French, in a normal exchange French, you'll get a position like this, where the pawn will eventually come to c3 or maybe c4. And the knight doesn't go to c3, right? The knight will normally come to d2. However, In this variation, oh my god, in this variation, the idea is that if this bishop comes to d6 to obviously d5 hangs, but let's say it doesn't hang, the point is to rotate this knight via e2 back over to the king side. Then you can play a move like c3. And you're essentially saying that I wanted to put my knight there and then rotate it, and you're wasting time moving your bishop back and forth, or forward and back. A very interesting opening idea. And his opponent goes knight e7, knight f3, bishop g4, castle, knight c6. His opponent goes for the d4 pawn. And Luke told me that he knew that this was very dangerous. h3, bishop retreats. If take, and the knight tries to take on d5, try and find the move for the white pieces here. That all but... Okay, it doesn't secure a victory, but it's better for white. Queen g4. Attack, x-ray. So black has to take on c3, defending the knight. bc3. Knight moves to e6, defending g7. Bishop to a3, attacking the knight. And it's a bishop pair versus a knight pair. Yes, white is down a pawn, and yes, the pawn structure is a bit dubious, but this is really difficult for black to defend. I mean, if black castles here, the computer already thinks that white can sack the... that's really cool. Can sack the bishop and then win the knight on e7 and just go up in exchange. So it's really tricky. g5 is a move here. Wow, that's really cool. Queen b4, though. Interesting. And of course, like a5, the queen can just drop back. So that's fine. And probably c5 has to be played. Queen b7, rook b8, queen a7. That's very complicated. That's not what happened, though. His opponent played bishop to h5, and Luke goes a3, asking the bishop if it wants to take on c3, which means that his d4 pawn would be well defended. This bishop is very strong. This bishop is very strong and unopposed. And this knight is now completely misplaced because the pawns are absolutely dominating the knight's forward movement. There's also not really a whole lot in getting to c4. It doesn't really matter. So his opponent retreats the bishop and says that you cannot defend this pawn, right? If you try to play a move like knight here, then bishop f3. If you try to play a move like knight to b5, then apparently a6, knight d6, queen d6, c3. This is okay. I suppose white has the bishop pair, but black is perfectly happy. He can even castle queenside potentially, and that's the most common move actually. f6 is a very strange move. That's the second most common move. But at the very least, bishop g6. Black can offer a bishop trade, and white is still better, but this is survivable. Rook e1. The bishop goes to d6. Luke goes rook to e1, applying pressure to the knight. And black grabs the pawn. Here there is one move. One move for the white pieces. Try and find it. You should be able to find this. Pause the video. g4. Attacking the bishop. If the bishop retreats, the knight hangs, obviously. So the knight has to take with check. Queen takes. Bishop drops back. And bishop takes g6. Not the most accurate move. Knight d5 is slightly better. This knight is pinned, of course. But black can castle, bishop g5. And this is very uncomfortable. There is bishop to h2 here. King h2, queen d5. Offering a queen trade. You can't take because your queen hangs. If you take, then take. Black is okay. But Luke wants to attack. He takes on g6. He takes on g6. hg6. Looks a little bit scary. Knight d5. Here, if bishop to h2, king to h2, the knight is defended by the queen, and there is absolutely nothing. You can't take here because your knight is pinned, so you can just take the queen, and the knight, of course, can't take back. So c6, a blunder. The best move was to castle. And after bishop to g5, then you play bishop to h2, and after king takes, queen takes, now if you do take here, the knight can take back. And of course, you can't take the knight because your queen hangs. So here, a move like rook ad1 most likely, knight b6, rook e7. White is the only one pushing here. The material is equal. The bishop should probably be better than the knight because there's pawns on both sides of the board and it's a very open position. And of course, the white pieces are more active. Oh, I did not mean to do that. But c6 is played. c6. And here there is one move for white. Of course, it's taking on e7. Bishop takes e7. And bishop to g5. Attacking the bishop. You have to play f6 to block it. Rook a to d1. Counter-attacking the queen. The queen goes to a5. Trying to attack the bishop. Well, there's several moves here for white, actually. But try to find any of the winning moves. The most accurate one, which I will give you all the brownie points for, is what... not actually what Luke played. Bishop to d2 makes a lot of sense. And after queen c7, defending the bishop. Bishop to f4, attacking the queen. Queen to b6. What's wrong with this? No, there's nothing wrong with that. You just win the bishop. But Luke went queen to e4. The bishop is hanging in two different ways, but there will be mate on the board. So black has to castle, and the bishop drops back to d2 now, attacking the queen. There is no bishop to b5, and after the queen moves to block the attack on the bishop, the queen goes to c4 with check, the killer. If you take here, of course white is still better, but like black actually has play. Bishop c3 is better, securing the pawn in this manner, but queen c4 is just lights out. If you move your king, your queen gets taken by the rook. So the queen blocks, queen d5, cd5, rook e7, and black resigns in this position because he's down a full bishop. Very nice game from Luke. Rob, unfortunately, lost on board 3, meaning that the score is tied 1.5, 1.5. Going into the final game, Togrul against Reese. Togrul with the black pieces. d4, d5, c4, e6. Togrul plays a very interesting idea here in the Queen's Gambit Declined, kind of a Catalan-esque setup. He baits the queen to take on c4, which, by the way, this has really good win rates for black, this line. And goes b5, kicking the queen away, and bishop b7. Black gets on the diagonal before white does. Bishop to g2. c5. If dc5, queen d3, ed3, bishop c5, it should be clear that black is better here. The d-pawn is isolated. The bishops are very active. Black is ready to castle. The knight can probably come in somehow, maybe even to d7. And the rooks are going to go on d8 and c8. Very easy position. So white, of course, doesn't do that. He castles, but c4, attacking the queen, forcing the queen back. And it's simply a 3-on-2. It's a 3-on-2, a long-term advantage for black. Bishop e7, a4. Of course, you should never take here. This is completely ludicrous. The queen will take, and you are down a pawn. Even if you didn't go down a pawn, you'd just be splitting up your structure. So the knight jumps in, which, by the way, I could not comprehend this move. I did not understand this in the slightest. I don't know why you would allow a bishop trade here. Like, why would you not just, I don't know, play ab5, ab5, rook a8, rook a8, and try to develop this knight somehow? I suppose it's not easy, because if you bring the knight here, b4 is actually a big problem. You have to drop the knight all the way back. The computer wants b3. And this makes a lot of sense, but maybe white didn't like the fact that this just gives black a passed pawn. Maybe that was why he rejected this. So white jumps the knight in. Of course, bishop trade. And this was a very interesting position. Because after bishop takes, king takes, the best move here for black is knight c6, which I thought was really interesting. And the point is, if the knight takes, then queen d5 check. If the king retreats, then queen takes on c6. The best move here for white is actually e4. And if queen takes e4, then queen to f3 defends the knight. So black would have to take the knight, and white would have to play f3. And black is still better here, but this is a very interesting way for white to go about the position. However, Togrul plays the move b4. Again, it's a 2-on-1 now. e3, queen d5 check, queen f3, knight bd7. Togrul is fine with trades because after the queens come off the board, it is clear that black is the only one pushing for a win, because one of these pawns is going to get through eventually. Bishop d6. By the way, obviously, it's 1.5, 1.5. If we want to make good progress in this tournament, we need to try and win this game. Bishop d2, attacking the pawn. a5, defending the pawn. f4, trying to take space. The knight jumps into e5. This is absolute domination. Look how dominant the black pieces are. White can't break out. He has one of the saddest bishops I've ever seen. Knight goes to b6. Bishop goes back to e1. f6, kicking the knight out. Rook f to c8. Knight goes back to d2. f5. White takes, but I mean, the knight is coming to d5 now. Toggle plays. I think I really like the idea of taking with the d pawn rather than the f pawn. Of course, common wisdom would say take with the f pawn because you're taking towards the center, but he takes with the d pawn, giving white a passed pawn. But it doesn't matter because the knight comes to d5, and look how strong this knight is. Rook goes to c1. This knight can't develop. It has nowhere to go. Rook comes c6. King f2. Rook c8, rook a2, c3. Toggle gets all of his pieces in the perfect positions and then pushes. Take, bishop is forced back, knight b4 attacking the rook. Rook goes to c2. Where can the rook go? Like, if the rook goes to e2, knight d3 check. There's nothing. So the rook goes here, knight d3 check anyway. King moves, knight c1, rook c1, c2. The knight moves, rook c3, bishop c3, rook c3. Toggle is up a piece. The king moves, rook d3, king takes, rook takes. And here his opponent makes the game very easy by going king to b2. Bishop to a3 check, of course, is played, and his opponent resigns. It's completely lost regardless. Of course, his opponent was probably trying to... I don't actually know what he was trying to stop. I'm a bit confused with this move. I mean, it's completely lost anyway. I suppose the point is if the king goes here, then rook d3 and the d-pawn is lost, but it's game over regardless. And we win the game 2.5, 1.5 after great performances from Luke and Toggle, and I was very happy with my game. Of course, just getting a very comfortable draw and being on the better side of that draw. So we are, so far, 2 wins, 2 draws, 1 loss. We are the bottom seed. That is incredible. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to check out the previous episodes of the tournament, then make sure you watch, I think, the playlist up here. Yeah, the playlist that will appear up here. No, sorry, down here, I'm bugging. And if you want to see another really cool game in the Slav Defense, which is what I was basically playing, then check out the video up here. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in one of those videos.